touted as the golden crop, a source of livelihood for millions of smallholders. Malaysia and Indonesia, two of the world's largest producers of palm oil, have banded together to protect interests of the commodity which they claim are now at stake. When Indonesian President Joko Widodo visited Malaysia in early June, he and Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim reaffirmed their commitment to jointly defend palm oil and other agricultural commodities. They said introduction of the new EU regulation against deforestation was discriminatory and punitive in nature, especially against smallholders. Combined, Malaysia and Indonesia produce 85% of the global supply of palm oil and palm products. A joint mission led by Malaysia Deputy Prime Minister Fadila Yusof and Indonesia Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs Airlangga Hartarto was in Brussels recently to convey their displeasures to their EU counterparts.
Indonesia is already complaining to WTO. I think we will fight till the end.
Both countries want EU to take prompt action to address the issue fairly by recognizing their respective sustainability standards.
We hope that EUDR will accept and recognize our ISPO from Indonesia and MSPO from Malaysia. With that, because we have all the system, we have all the mechanics in what way we certified all the plantation.
Under the EU Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR, that was passed by the European Parliament in April, all imports of agricultural products ranging from cattle, coffee, cocoa, palm oil, soy, to wood and rubber must not be harvested from deforested land. Importers are required to provide details of the product's supply chain, including geolocation in the form of coordinates of the plantation or farms. Otherwise, their shipments may be denied entry into EU markets. Big companies have 18 months to comply, while smallholders must adhere to the guidelines in 2 years. Malaysia and Indonesia are worried that they may be benchmarked as high-risk countries where 9% of shipments will be checked, compared to low-risk countries which only subjected to 1% checks.
Imagine the importers in Europe, to them, this is too cumbersome, this is too complicated, just don't buy, because it's so difficult. And I said there will be mountains of documents to prove. They are not going to go through with that. Then who are the losers? These are, the smallholders.
There are currently over 400,000 smallholders in Malaysia, while Indonesia claims to have 100 times more. Many, especially in rural areas, may not have the means to comply with the complicated guidelines.
Settlers are not that IT savvy, Of course, they will have to ask someone to do it for them. Because very burdensome and could be costly even to the small farmers,
But the EU head of delegation to Malaysia believes that the regulation is largely misunderstood by stakeholders and dismissed allegations of discrimination and protectionism.
We believe the EUDR is a very fair regulation from the European Commission. There has been no statement whatsoever anti-palm oil.
The EUDR, he further clarified, has a cut-off date. Only products derived from land deforested after December 2020 will be penalized under the new regulation. To help explain the guidelines, the EU has set up a task force. It's sending officials to Malaysia and Indonesia to engage with stakeholders, including NGOs and smallholders. Meanwhile, Malaysia Palm Oil Board, or MPOB, has embarked on a charm offensive to raise awareness of palm oil's health benefits. For starters, palm oil doesn't get oxidized easily under high heat, so it's suitable to be used for deep frying. Also, it's rich in vitamin E and carotenes, says nutritionist Dr. Kangarani from MPOB.
Tocotrienol is a form of vitamin E that is different from the usual form of vitamin E, which is called tocopherol. So it is highly present in palm oil. Recently, we've got the approval from Ministry of Health for tocotrienol to be added into food. The manufacturers can make a claim that tocotrienol can reduce oxidative stress and improve cognitive function.
Her department has worked with thousands of children in Gansu province in China, as well as students from indigenous communities in rural Malaysia, where palm oil was introduced into their diet.
Now, these are the biscuits for primary school children. They are baked with red palm oil that's rich in carotene. Now, let's have a taste, Dr. Ganga. They're delicious, and they're said to be effective in treating vitamin A deficiency among school children. They're so nice.
Through raising the public awareness on various attributes of palm oil, the agency is actively exploring new markets in China, Turkey, as well as other African countries. Last year, Malaysia exported over 15 million metric tons of palm oil worth nearly $30 billion, of which about 10% were exported to EU. EU is the third largest market after India and China.
If in the case that EU decided not to buy palm oil, I think the other countries, other part of the world will definitely benefit from palm oil. I think palm oil is here to help the people, to help the consumers, to help the users with all the positive attributes.
Rimba Watch, an environmental watchdog focusing on deforestation, said it's high time for governments to assist smallholders to map out their farms so that they too can comply with EU regulation on traceability and enjoy a higher premium for their exports.
I think it makes sense for Malaysia to help smallholders map out their concessions anyway, regardless of the EUDR, because it's very important to know where the palm oil is so that we can then map out things like climate risk to smallholders, risk of landslides, risk of drought, so on and so forth.
He said the government must have the political will to push through reforms in the proposed Climate Change Act to stop industry from cutting more trees to expand their plantations. However, he conceded that oil palm plantations are no longer the #1 driver for future deforestation. Malaysia stands to lose some 2.3 million hectares of natural forests, and more than half is earmarked for timber plantations.
And what we found is that 1.8 million hectares are under threat from timber plantations, and only about 350,000 hectares are under threat from palm oil. Right? So palm oil represents a minority threat to Malaysia's forests in the future. And timber plantations are a commodity which are covered under the EUDR.
He added that timber plantation should not be classified as reforestation, as it destroys biodiversity in the ecosystem and impede forest recovery. At the current rate, Malaysia is likely to see its forest cover dipping below 48%, despite its official commitment to keep it above 50%.
Now, after the break, we'll head to Vietnam to see how coffee exporters there are coping with the new EU regulation.
This is Vietnam's Central Highlands. With rich soils and unique climate, the region is home to Vietnam's biggest coffee plantations. Vietnam is the second biggest coffee exporter in the world, with more than 1.2 million coffee farmers. About 50 to 60% of the coffee goes to Europe, its largest export market. But the industry is now faced with increasing uncertainty due to EU's new rule that aims to fight global deforestation and climate change. Multiple industry sources say deforestation is not a problem in Vietnam's coffee industry, as majority of the plantation were first planted decades ago.
Vấn đề này không phải là vấn đề quan ngại. Các cái vùng trồng cà phê á, bây giờ là người ta đang trồng vào những cái khu vực mà có cái độ đất ổn định cao. Và cái hiện tượng mà bảo là để mà phá rừng để mà trồng cà phê á, bây giờ có thể nói là gần như không xảy ra được nữa.
Những cái diện tích á, mà trồng sau năm 2020 á, thì cũng rất là khó. Bởi vì sao? Bởi vì là hiện nay á, là diện tích rừng của Việt Nam họ đã cấm việc mà trồng cà phê theo đất rừng là nay là cơ bản là không có, về cơ bản là không chiếm tỷ lệ nhiều, nhưng mà để mà định vị này, để mà vẽ polygon với những cái diện tích mà trên 4 hectare theo quy định của Liên minh á, châu Âu á, thì với những cái doanh nghiệp phải thực sự có lực thì mới làm được, thì đó là cái khó cho các doanh nghiệp.
The new EU regulation requires traceability of coffee beans as well as geolocation of each coffee farm. Many say the main challenge is how to come up with verifiable proof, particularly for those smallholders.
Like other countries, mostly in the world, Vietnam is also having like the 90% of the production produced by the smallholders, and each farmers, they might have about 3 or 4 plots, and those plots are also scattered. It also means that the management of those plots to make it non-deforested and sustainable production is becoming more challenges for them.
Major Vietnamese coffee exporters have worked with independent agencies of the international coffee industry to promote and obtain certificates on sustainable coffee production. However, the new EU regulation is much stricter and demands much more details than those standard sustainability certificates. Lack of clarity on the guidelines are putting the coffee exporters on edge.
Thì hiện nay là mình cũng chưa nắm được các tiêu chuẩn thì họ đưa rất là cụ thể. Rất cụ thể bởi vì còn đối với châu Âu thì họ đưa ra cái luật chứ không có hướng dẫn.
The guidance for implementation is not there yet with EU Commission. And also we also don't know what is the result of benchmarking Vietnam coffee sector. So the question of benchmarking of Vietnam coffee sector against other countries and among the different parts of Vietnam against other parts are quite important.
The EU regulation creates a benchmarking system which assigns a level of risk related to deforestation to countries within and outside the EU. The risk category will determine the level of specific obligations for traders and authorities to carry out inspections and controls. Much like its Southeast Asian neighbors, Malaysia and Indonesia, Vietnam is worried to be benchmarked as a high-risk country.
The matter is just only like whether we can meet the deadline of 18 months or not. This is how we have to race against the time in order to do that.
Like other countries that export agricultural products to the European market, Vietnam has 18 months to comply with the new regulation. Some major coffee exporters in June have launched pilot programs that collect information and data in a joint attempt to devise solutions. Amid uncertainties, insiders say they believe the new EU rules will help transform the country's coffee industry into a more sustainable trade, although the added compliance will surely increase the cost of coffee production in Vietnam. After the break, we look at how Australian farmers plan to hit back and how Brussels is forging ahead with its climate goals with this new landmark regulation.
Barbara Station, deep in the heart of rural New South Wales and one of Australia's most productive agricultural regions. Farm manager Matt Cummins looks after more than 10,000 acres of land here, rearing livestock and growing crops. But to make this a profitable enterprise, the land also needs a helping hand. That's why so many additional native trees have been planted in recent years.
This project here in itself was developed in the early 90s to try and stabilise and lower the salinity table within the local profile.
Tree planting and the additional vegetation has helped to enrich the soil and steady the water supply passing underground. Quality land is essential for keeping his 1,000 head of cattle and 10,000 sheep well fed. And that's largely thanks to sound agricultural practices. But a few thousand kilometres further north in Queensland, it's a different picture. Deforestation has denuded much of the landscape and threatens native wildlife because of beef-driven land clearing.
The current amount of clearing that happens, say, in the state of Queensland is about 500,000 hectares a year, so 500,000 hectares a year, and that's impacting on dozens, if not hundreds, of endangered species habitat.
Now, a new law introduced by the European Union will target deforestation and ban the purchase of overseas beef and other agricultural products unless farmers can prove the meat comes from land that's not been cleared since 2020. And that's worrying some sections of the agricultural community and Australian lawmakers. For the government here in Canberra, this new EU law creates something of a dilemma. Australia is keen to sign a free trade deal with the European Union, and reservations about farm exports could seriously damage those negotiations. Such is the gap between Canberra and the European Union that the government has hinted it's prepared to walk away from the free trade talks. And that hardline stance has the backing of Australia's National Farmers Federation.
Our message to government has been, don't sign an agreement if it's to the detriment of Australian farmers. We want freer trade. We want more liberalised markets. We want more recognition of, the strengths and competitiveness of the Australian agriculture. But what we don't want is for Australian agriculture to be kneecapped by some free trade agreement that doesn't allow us to continue to export and continue to develop here as an industry.
This argument goes to the very heart of the current discussions. Farmers argue that Australia has different agricultural systems and practices because of its geography and climatic extremes. But environmental NGO The Wilderness Society says the new EU law could benefit Australian farmers, most of whom are opposed to deforestation.
I actually think this is a really positive thing for Australian farmers. If we can sort out this issue around land clearing, Australia will be at the front of the queue for selling produce and getting finance from Europe.
Back at Bobara Station, the issue is less about politics and more about good animal husbandry and sound agricultural practices.
Every bit of your income is based upon how you look after your country. Look, we've got to stabilise our entire beings around it. The Australian agricultural sector is strong, it's vibrant, it's backed by passionate people and passionate companies.
It is that fundamental optimism of people like Matt Cummins that keeps Australian farmers going in the face of frequent floods and drought. Now there's another challenge, with the vexed issue of deforestation having to be resolved if Australian agriculture is to gain a foothold in one of the world's richest markets.
The European Union is rolling out a zero-tolerance policy for goods produced in deforested areas. The goal is to reduce the impact European consumers have on the world's forests. The bloc is the second biggest market globally for goods linked to deforestation after China. Latest figures show the EU was responsible for 16% of deforestation associated with international trade, amounting to over 200,000 hectares. A record the EU is not proud of.
The more we wait, the more we will lose. And we are, in the end, as well guilty about what is happening in certain other zones in the world, because we are consuming coffee, cocoa, meat, soy, and as well palm oil, for example. And those products are produced often on surfaces that have been deforested to make a place for that agricultural land. And they land in our shelves in the supermarkets.
Palm oil, found in everything from shampoo to chocolate spread, is one of the main culprits, representing nearly 34% of the EU's deforestation-linked commodities. Not far behind is soy, representing 32%, with wood, cocoa, coffee and beef all ranging between 5 and 10% of the bloc's deforestation footprint. The EU's new legislation has generated fierce pushback from the world's largest palm producers in Malaysia and Indonesia, who recently sent a delegation to Brussels to voice their concerns. This new law is likely to impact millions of smallholders in both countries. Palm oil producers say the law misunderstands their industry.
It's true that especially in Europe, palm oil has had a negative reputation over a couple of decades, mainly linking it to loss of biodiversity, deforestation, etc. But we see that that tide is turning a bit. There's becoming a more nuanced debate also since as a tragic result of the war, Russian war on Ukraine, a lot of companies had to go back to palm oil and realize that it's a good product, that we need that diversity of oils in the market as well. In general, I would say it's a very ubiquitous product. It's a product that's in 50% of all the products you will find in the supermarkets.
Elsewhere, there is a degree of caution and confusion about what the new rules might mean for the EU's major trading partners. The UK provides the bloc with more beef than any other country. The EU is a huge market, worth about $2 billion a year. British farming organisations are hopeful that it won't cause too many problems, simply because land hasn't been deforested for agriculture for hundreds of years in the UK. Greater scrutiny on where beef comes from could see the UK improve its market share, but more paperwork could also slow things down and put some producers off. However, speaking to different groups, some have said that until the delegated acts are published, they're unsure if it applies to so-called integrated products. That would include things like beef that has been fed with soy. They're hopeful that the UK is classified as a low-risk country, and therefore checks would occur on only 1% of total exports to the EU. But environmental NGOs are clear that industries that rely on deforestation simply need to clean up their act or face the consequences.
I think it's time for the industry to really clean its supply chain from deforestation, and so yeah. No, they will have to do it, or they won't have access to the EU market. If there are checks done by competent authorities, then the companies can get a fine, or even the imports can be seized.
This new law will come into force towards the end of 2024. That gives the industry time to adapt, but lawmakers in Brussels are clear. If it ends up punishing producers that rely on deforestation, well, that is a price worth paying. The pushback hasn't seemed to have dissuaded the EU, however. There's little question that for Brussels, deforestation must be a thing of the past.